Hello and welcome to Voices of BlueScope, the podcast where we go behind the scenes at BlueScope to meet the people who create strength every day. I'm your host, Martin Feld. Thank you for listening. In this episode, we're featuring an interview by Mark Hein, Director of Corporate Affairs North America, with Kristie Keast, Chief Executive North America at BlueScope. Kristie has had a long and varied career with BlueScope and assumed the role of Chief Executive in 2023. Throughout the discussion that you're about to hear, Kristie shares with Mark her personal story, her working background, the challenges that she's overcome, and what she believes are the attributes of a great leader. Let's shift to the interview now.
I've been with BlueScope coming on 23 years, so I joined in 2002 when BlueScope publicly listed.
That's a long time.
It is.
It's unusual for someone to stay with a company over a lifetime of a career anymore. What sort of was the impetus for you staying with BlueScope?
Just the vast opportunities I've been given. So I've been really fortunate to move roles every 2 to 3 years as I've broadened my skill sets and my leadership roles. So just the opportunities that BlueScope's provided, and definitely the people. So I've really enjoyed working in different regions of the business, obviously in different roles and different capacities that have given me exposure to people on the shop floor, to middle management, to senior management. So I really enjoy the culture.
You just took the role as Chief Executive in North America. When you think about how you got here, thinking back over the lifetime of your career at BlueScope, how do you think that all of those experience and the breadth of everything that you've kind of taken in prepared you to step into this role?
There's been a lot. So I've certainly had a journey. And if I think about all of the different factors and the different roles that I've done, I think they've all had a lesson and a development and a real growth impact in terms of priming me for this role. I think starting very early in my career, straight out of university, into a stevedoring environment in the early 90s in a really industrial, unionised, male-dominated area was absolutely a very challenging environment, but one that I think has shaped a lot of resiliency, a lot of tenacity. It took a lot to be able to break through and be accepted, a lot of vulnerability and a lot of isolation, and obviously a lot of bias that I had to navigate and really decide whether I wanted to sort of fight that and continue. And given I'm a stubborn, very persistent sort of personality, very determined, I chose to do that. And that took quite a lot of courage. So as a 20-year-old, working on the wharves, working in marine, bunkering and on the big iron vessels, it did take a lot of courage, and I had to earn my stripes. But the reward and the recognition and the satisfaction of I guess, building those relationships and making those connections and feeling accepted really has motivated me to continue. So it was getting out of my comfort zone, and over the years really trying to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because I think you have to push yourself if you want to continue to learn, continue to grow. You've got to adopt a really risk-ready mindset and not be afraid. I think often, we're all worried about what happens if it goes wrong and put all of this fear into our minds. I think at some point you've got to get over that hill so that you can unlock and see what is on the other side. And I've found the more and more I've done that, the more confidence you build, and actually the more lessons you do learn, which have really been important, I think, and really a testament to even taking on this role. I feel like I'm out of my comfort zone again and really pushing against some of those self-confidence barriers, but knowing I can do it, betting on myself, because I've been able to do that in the past.
It's interesting how those early experiences sort of gave you a foundation of courage and strength and really learning what it means to kind of pick yourself up off the tarmac, as it were, and kind of keep going. But I mean, you've had a broad range of roles across a whole bunch of different divisions, and you have come to this role from almost a very non-traditional perspective. Could you talk a little bit about the space between those early lessons and the diversity of experience that you've had and how that helps shape kind of how you got here.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I reflect back and choosing 1994 as my sort of first professional role, I actually started in health, safety and environment. That's my technical educational background, 20 years in that field. But what it really brought to me and to my development and exposure was a really good understanding of the operations and the processes, a really phenomenal connection with our workforce, and then extending that career through different regions and in different businesses. So it gave me a really good understanding of the cultural nuances all through China, through ASEAN. I did a whole lot of work on construction safety in India, and then obviously had some experience with the safety side of the integration. So when we acquired Butler in 2004, I worked in the US to help with that acquisition, then the Smorgon acquisition in 2007. So a real ecosystem of all these different cultural nuances. And then, as I said, boots on the ground, solving problems with our people has just given me a very good understanding of the business, good understanding of the culture, but importantly, sort of the operational pieces. So that's sort of been one element. I then felt ready to do more, and I guess it's sort of that people connection and relatability, which is when I then moved into an organisation development role, and that was sort of the start of really broadening out into a broader people role. So moved into the general manager people role in the Australian and New Zealand businesses. And that was awesome in that it was really diverse. So corporate affairs, community, industrial relations, so working through employee engagement aspects, obviously the traditional HR remuneration sides, which then primed me for the Chief People Officer role. And the other nuance too is that's what's been advantageous is transitioning from business to group roles. You get a totally different perspective, working in the business. To some degree, there's more tangibility, you can have more direct impact, and you can see the impact of those decisions. Whereas in a corporate role, you've got to work really hard at influencing stakeholders and getting work done through others, but you also get the lens of, all of the governance requirements and expectations that we need to meet. Being an ASX-listed company, you get to understand the board's role and their due diligence and obligations and their viewpoints on things versus management. So I think traversing all of those elements have been a really good ground and landscape that's sort of really helped shape for the remit I have now.
It's a lot of experience. You've covered an enormous amount of ground in your career, and especially when you think about starting on the docks, kind of moving and getting through all of these roles. There's part of that that's you. There's also part of that's BlueScope.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me a little bit about how BlueScope supported you and helped you sort of pick your places along the way.
Yes, well, firstly, really grateful for all of the opportunities I've been afforded by BlueScope. The most advantageous thing for me that's really helped is along the way I've always had an amazing one-up manager or sponsor that has actually called out and in my earlier years actually pushed me to apply or have actually guided me to role opportunities that at the time I probably didn't think I was ready for or confident in doing. So I think having someone to sponsor you and be willing to put you forward has been a very good thing for me. In terms of career development, I'm very much a believer there's got to be mutual accountability. You have to own your own career as well. You can't be passive and rely upon the organisation. So I think I've played equally an active role in charting a course, trying to find those opportunities. I've never really looked up around hierarchies and roles as such. I've always looked at my career as where do I want to keep learning? Or this seems really interesting. Can I get involved in that? So I've always put my hand up for projects or experiences, really just out of this yearning to continue challenging, continue developing and learning and that curiosity. I've sort of shared that with the company and often either with the manager co-created an opportunity or otherwise called out, I would like to play more in this space. So that has definitely served me well.
You talk a little bit about co-creating opportunities with a manager. Tell me a little bit more about like what goes through your head. How do you identify that, and then what do you do in order to sort of create that opportunity for yourself? Because that's interesting.
Yeah, it was probably, I felt I reached a bit of a ceiling in HSC. So when I was in the global VP role, they were actually on market for the OD role, the VP OD role. And so I said to my manager at the time, because the process was taking a long time, it actually ended up falling through. So I said, would you like me to help? Do you want me to step in? Is there anything I can take off your plate? And so I started to get involved and managed all of the talent succession planning, all the diversity and inclusion elements and the strategic workforce planning. And lo and behold, they said, you're doing such a great job. We're going to appoint you to that role. And actually dual-hatted the VP HSE and OD role. So they're the moments that I think I've helped influence by normally, as I said, mutually trying to support my manager in achieving something, but seeing an opportunity and really leaning into it such that it ends up being a great outcome.
You know, you talked a little bit about accountability and the role that you played in your career. When you think back to some of the other things that you had to bring to the table, like self-awareness and flexibility, talk a little bit about how you kind of develop those skills in yourself. Like, you know, really, how do you learn to become self-aware? How do you practice flexibility? How do you bring some of those aspects that make you career positive if you don't necessarily have them inherently?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. So often you will see people that want all these opportunities and expect it just to turn up on a silver platter. And by flexibility, what I mean is you have to make sacrifices sometimes or compromises, or you have to be open to change. And so for many of the roles I've taken, particularly over the last 14 years, I've had to relocate. I've had to relocate internationally, and I know for many that's more exciting, but I've also had to do that domestically when I took a role at Port Kembla and relocate for that opportunity. So I think you need to be flexible, to be adaptable. The self-awareness is really seeking feedback and being open to the feedback so that you can also be quite humble in your career aspirations, but making sure it actually matches your capabilities as well, and being realistic and setting a reasonable time frame as well. And I think that's important for the company as well, just so that you can sort of manage those expectations within yourself, but within the context of what those role opportunities are within BlueScope. You know, there's been times I've applied for a role and I thought I was ready and I didn't get it, and I was very disappointed. But it was a good sort of self-reflection moment to go, actually, you probably weren't ready. And by doing an extra year or two in the role that I was currently performing in really paid off, because there were quite some challenges at the tail end of it that I think made me more ready for when that opportunity became available again.
When you talk about self-awareness, like, what are you really getting at?
So I think all through my career, and earlier on it was obvious, you know, when you got feedback in that industrial environment, but I think as you sort of mature and go through career progression, whether it's laterally or vertical or what have you, I think it's inviting feedback. I think we often wait for the formal review processes or not actually invited at all. So I've always been curious just to sort of understand what impact am I having. I am a very humble, modest person, and that's just sort of come through my makeup and my history. And so when I've invited feedback, or when anyone invites feedback, I think there is an element of vulnerability to open up to actually hear it and to accept it, and then adapt and actually integrate it into how you might tweak some things or how you might shift some attributes to sort of help improve on your, on your leadership impact or on your performance going forward. And I think I have been very open to that, but importantly, proactively invited it as well. And, it's hard. Sometimes we have blind spots and we go, when we see it, we think, oh, surely not, that's not me. But at the end of the day, I think if you're getting feedback from a whole array of different people is another aspect I just wanted to call out. Like, go to people that there might be a bit of tension there, or they might have a really diverse opinion or a contrasting view to you. I think over the years I've really tried to think about who I seek feedback from as well. And I think that's another important piece, and really leaning in and having some courage to go to people that you wouldn't normally seek feedback from, or you think that they probably have a negative view, just to sort of really dig deep and get at the heart of a full 360 of what those perspectives are. And that's something I've got more and more confident in and have, really valued. But you have to do something with the feedback. Otherwise, those that give you feedback and not see change is, it's not really fair on them, because you've invited that feedback and it's on you, I think, to be responsible for doing what you can in terms of modifying, as I said, some of those attributes that you're trying to practice.
Let's talk a little bit about leadership as a concept. You have a really interesting leadership pedigree, and you've come across a whole range of experiences that have shaped the leader that you are today. What are the key things that you've learned about leadership? Like, when you think about the concept of leadership, what comes to mind for you?
The biggest one for me is being true to yourself, being authentic, being really open, being that trusted advisor for people, which means being approachable, being dependable. If people come to me, I feel a real obligation to do what I can to support them, to listen, and to be active in what I can, do you know what I mean, to help them. It's also really around trying to inspire and motivate a group of people or individuals to a worthwhile endeavour. So for me, that's the exciting part around setting a vision or a mission and then working with a team to be able to really get that alignment so that they can feel part of something bigger or something worthwhile that they can really play a key role in and achieve their own personal accomplishments. And then obviously with any good leader, it does come down to really clear communication. But for me, I find often I get called a very empathetic leader, and there's a difference. It's not being sympathetic, it's more just demonstrating that empathy and care to help that individual, be the best that they can be.
When you think back about the leadership lessons that you learned along the way in your career, talk to me about some inspiring leaders or just people that have inspired your leadership style and had an impact on you. Tell me a little bit about some of those key leadership models.
Yeah, I think it's really boils down to those that stay true to themselves, stay humble. For me, you see a lot of egos in organisations, and I have a lot of leadership mentors or people I've worked with who it's not about them. I think as you become a leader in a corporate sort of setting, it's not the I, it's actually we're all part of an organisation, and so it's representing leadership for the organisation, because you'd hope that when you leave that organisation is still successful. It's not on just you as an individual. And so I've been inspired by those leaders that haven't made it about them. They've made it about the team, and clearly they've obviously brought, different thinking or have really been able to make great decisions and build out those strategic priorities. But for me, it's just about staying personable and approachable and staying real and being authentic. Honesty, I think, is really key. So being honest and true is really important for people to see. And sadly, there's a lot of dysfunction in a lot of organisations where that doesn't exist. But for me, that's really important, and I have had some fantastic role models over my career that have really inspired me to continue to live up to those values.
You've talked about your relationship with your father in particular, and the impact that he had on the professional and the leader that you became. Talk to me a little bit about the importance of the lessons that your dad taught you and how you apply them today.
Yeah, look, there's many, and my dad had his own small business for coming on 60 years in the asphalt business. So a guy of hard knocks, and that really helped me in those early industrial days, because he was someone I could, in the event when the stevedores walked out on me and I was left there on my own, he was the one that sort of kept me going and taught me to take the lessons out of it. What did you learn from today that can help you succeed tomorrow? So he's always been there for me. The thing I like about him most on most weeks is, he'll ring me and he'll always be checking in to say, don't get ahead of yourself, make sure your head's not getting too big, stay down to earth, be yourself. And it's kind of nice to have someone that does keep you grounded and raises that consciousness. So he's that guy, and he's also helped me see people for who they are, and that's why, as part of a leader, I like to see everyone as someone and not something. And he's always employed underprivileged people, giving people a second chance in his business that have come out of prison. He just sees people for who they are, and that's the same with me. Everyone in the organisation, no matter what role you play, no matter what level you are in the organisation, I feel are important and contribute.
You've talked about some of the attributes of a great leader in different venues, and one of the things that I think you've talked about in the past is, sort of the trifecta of vulnerability, resiliency, and gratitude. Talk to me a little bit about your leadership trifecta and why those concepts are important to you.
Yeah, well, I think vulnerability creates courage. You have to be vulnerable in order to look at yourself, honestly, and then be courageous in terms of what you do with that, as I said before, whether, feedback or what have you. Resiliency is really important, and I think to do that there has to be an element of self-care. We all want to show up with the best energy possible at work, so to do that you really need to sort of keep your self-care in check, whether that be, your health, your own think time, your own time management. And I really learnt the hard way, so I've always been really hard worker, high work ethic, push myself. Used to be a bit of a perfectionist, so that's sort of something I've had to manage around just meeting my own expectations versus others. But when I had my first child, I don't think I fully connected that I was a mum, and I got promoted on maternity leave. So I was sort of straight into the VP role with a newborn baby or 6-month-old baby, and I think I just kept going. I didn't actually modify or set any boundaries, such that, I had a few hard knocks in terms of not getting that balance right. So it was a really profound moment for me that if I'm going to be a mum and a wife and a sibling and a daughter and wear all these different hats and participate at work and in a management or a leadership role, I really need to have all of those things in check so that I can show up, with the amount of energy that you need to have when you're at work. So that's really important, the resiliency. And the gratitude is just foundational to me. I love people, and I guess that's why I've loved my career, because I just love meeting different characters and all the really proud people we have within BlueScope. But just thanking people, going out and being grateful and thanking people for their contribution, as well as that personal gratitude of appreciating, everything I've been given and all the opportunities I've had. So I think gratitude is a really important one to me that exemplifies one of those key attributes of leadership. And then the final one, and it goes back to leadership role models, in my early 20s, when the stevedores did walk out on me, I had a really lousy boss, and I think having good and the bad and the ugly is kind of helpful as a reference point. I didn't get a lot of support at that stage, but what it's taught me is a good leader is someone that's there in the good times and the tough times. And there's a really lovely analogy that Charles Wookey, who we used in the Leadership Forum, is a CEO of a business. He used sort of, if you can imagine a leader having a mirror and a door in the office, and, when everything goes really well, you would hope that they use the door to go out and find the people that were involved to thank them. And then in the bad, they go to the mirror and actually look at themselves to reflect on what could I have done differently to stop that happening again. And obviously the reverse of that is when everything goes well, you go to the mirror, and then when it goes bad, you go to the door to find someone to blame. And so I think having had the early experience in the 20s, I certainly didn't want to be that leader. So if things go bad, I want to be that person that is side by side with my team, working through what we need to work through to make things better. And if we do really, really well, it's not about me. As I said, leadership's not the I. It's about going and finding those people and thanking and acknowledge them for their efforts.
One of the things that you talked about earlier was authenticity. And I'd love to get your thoughts on authenticity and your ability to sort of connect with and inspire people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is a bit of a curveball on the original question, but like when you think about authenticity, what are the things along the way that have made that such an important part of how you show up?
Well, I think for me it's always been about others seeing me as a human. As I said, I've loved working with a diverse group of people and love being able to help others see their own potential. And so I think it just boils down to seeing that potential in others, setting a vision or a goal, and then really helping those individuals or a team, empowering them and letting them get on with it so that they can take it forward and achieve that success. And I feel like being part of something bigger is critical for people. People want to feel connected. So it's about creating that environment and a safe environment where everyone feels that they can offer their views, offer their ideas, and feel like they're heard and that they can actually go away and do something with it. So for me, that's sort of what it boils down to. And I think if you can get all of that happening, then that is absolute gold in sort of having a high-performance team, an engaged team, and really people feeling like they're part of something meaningful and being part of the success of the business or society now, given being a purpose-led organisation is really far more important than just sort of the money. It's about why we exist. And I think people feeling like they're having a bigger impact is key.
If you look back over the years of your career and think of like all the sum total, if you could go back to that young woman standing on that dock and remember what it was like to stand on that dock that day, whatever that was, what would you say to her on that day?
Many things. Many things, as I'm sure we all sort of look back and reflect. The one for me is just don't take yourself too seriously. I don't think I've ever taken myself too seriously. But, you've got to have fun. We spend so much time at work. For me, it's all about having fun and sharing in that with others. The second one is, as I sort of indicated before, I could set very high standards on myself. And I think to a certain degree, now I'm very open to failing, but I think just it's okay to make mistakes, and actually they're fundamental in terms of being able to learn. It's the only way you can kind of learn and develop. So for me, it's about just taking the lessons learned so that you can actually embed them and continue to develop so that you can continue to be successful. So be a bit kinder on yourself as well. As I said, just getting that balance of self-care is really important because we're all really busy, but just getting that 80-20 balance of everything, whether it's physical, spiritually or mentally, and just taking that time out, whatever it is, whether it's walking the dog just to get that uplift of rejuvenation. I think that's really key. And I've had, as I said, sort of lessons in each of those. So they're the things that I would go back and tell my younger self.
Those are all the great talking points.
Uh-huh.
But go back to that room where the employees walked out, and if you only had one sentence to say to that young woman, what would you say to her?
Don't give up. Follow your dreams. Prove them wrong.
Prove it wrong. Print that.
We hope that you enjoyed listening to Kristie's story and experiences, and we thank both her and Mark for giving their time to this podcast. For further information about what you just heard, make sure to view the links and show notes in your web browser or podcast app. Thank you for listening to the Voices of BlueScope podcast. We'll catch you next time.